bye, 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 baby, goodbye.
How does a rock and roll icon, loved by a generation and credited with shaping the sound of Australia, end up being forced out of the very empire he built by his own brother? To the world, Col Joye was a pioneer. The smile, the slick hair, the catchy tunes, he was Australia's first true rock star. From the mid-1950s, he ruled the charts, stole hearts on national television, and helped birth a music industry that barely existed before him. But beneath the glimmer of stardom, behind the infectious rhythms and showbiz glamour, lay a bitter truth rarely spoken aloud. A story of betrayal that would shatter not only his career, but also his family. For more than 3 decades, Col Joye devoted his life to building ATA Records, a powerhouse label that nurtured countless Australian talents. It was more than a business, it was his legacy. But then, without warning, it was ripped away. And the man responsible? His younger brother, Kevin Jacobsen, the very person Col had once brought into the industry and trusted without hesitation. This isn't just a tale of lost fortune. It's a haunting reminder of how fame, ambition, and blood ties can collide in the most devastating ways. As the music faded and the spotlight dimmed, Col Joye didn't just lose a company. He lost the world he created and the brother he believed would stand by him forever. Tonight on Aussie Uncovered, we dive deep into the extraordinary life of Col Joye, the rise, the rhythm, the betrayal, and the silence that followed. To understand the weight of what Col Joye lost, we must first revisit the era when he became a household name, a time when Australian music was still in its infancy, and a new cultural wave was beginning to ripple through suburban radios and smoky dance halls. The year was 1957. Elvis Presley had just exploded in the United States, and teenagers around the world were caught in the fever of rock and roll. In Australia, however, the music scene lagged far behind. American imports dominated the airwaves, and there was little belief that a local boy could ever rival the sound and style of the stars across the Pacific. But then came Col Joye. Born Colin Frederick Jacobsen in Sydney in 1937, Col grew up in a modest, working-class family. He had no formal music education, no pedigree, no industry backing, just a charming voice, a natural flair for performance, and a deep love for the music that was changing the world. Alongside his younger brothers, Kevin and Keith, he formed a band called the Joy Boys, and their infectious energy quickly caught attention. It wasn't long before Col Joye was performing regularly on Bandstand, the groundbreaking Australian television show that brought rock and roll into millions of living rooms. His boyish good looks and clean-cut charm made him an instant favorite among teenagers. And more importantly, palatable to their parents. While other rockers leaned into rebellion, Col Joye offered a safer, more polished version of the genre. He became the face of Australian youth culture, a cultural ambassador in cuffed pants and slick shoes. Hits like Bye Bye Baby and Rockin' Rollin' Clementine climbed the charts. He was among the first Australian artists to sell over 100,000 records, paving the way for others who would follow. But Col wasn't content to be just a singer. Behind the scenes, he had a sharp business mind, and with his brothers, he co-founded ATA, Australian Talent Associates, a production company that would eventually become ATA Records. ATA wasn't just a vanity label. It was a fully fledged operation, managing artists, producing records, organizing concerts, and shaping the very infrastructure of the Australian music business. Col's influence extended far beyond the microphone. He nurtured talents like Johnny Devlin, Little Patty, and even helped early on in the careers of the Bee Gees. While the audience saw a smiling singer with a guitar, Col Joye was quietly becoming one of the most powerful and respected figures in the Australian entertainment industry. By the late 1970s, Col had eased away from performance and dedicated himself almost entirely to the business side of music. ATA Records was thriving, and his brother Kevin had taken on a more active role, managing large-scale concerts and events, including Elton John's Australian tours. The Jacobsen brothers, Col and Kevin, were now moguls, commanding an empire that touched nearly every aspect of live and recorded music across the country. But behind the facade of family unity and business success, tensions were quietly building. The bond that had brought them to the top was slowly fraying. Ambitions shifted, visions diverged, and somewhere along the way, trust began to erode. Kevin's ambitions for grander global productions clashed with Col's more conservative, artist-focused approach. ATA was no longer just a family business. It had become a battlefield of egos and control. Few outsiders knew what was truly going on. Publicly, the Joye name still symbolized harmony and heritage. But within the boardrooms and backstage corridors, a silent coup was brewing. One that would end in heartbreak, legal fights, and the complete removal of Col Joye from the very company he had created. The golden boy of Australian rock and roll was about to face a reckoning no chart position could save him from. Col Joye's journey from suburban Sydney boy to national icon was not built on scandal, but on sheer persistence, charisma, and the uncanny ability to read the moment. In an era where Australia's music scene was often overshadowed by imports from the UK and US, Col didn't just follow the trends, he became the trend. In the late 1950s, the country was still basking in post-war conservatism. Radio was heavily regulated. The idea of young people screaming for a singer who shook his hips and strummed a guitar was, to many, still foreign. But Col Joye tapped into something simple and powerful: teenage optimism. His early performances, though tame by American standards, were energetic enough to excite the youth, but clean enough to win over cautious parents. He wasn't dangerous like Elvis, but he was exciting. That fine balance made him unstoppable. By 1959, his single Bye Bye Baby hit #1. He became the first Australian rock and roll artist to have a national hit. His appearances on Bandstand, then the biggest music show in the country, turned him into a weekly fixture in Australian households. Fans wrote letters in droves. His name was scrawled across school notebooks. Mothers adored him. Promoters rushed to book him. He was, in every sense, Australia's first homegrown pop sensation. But Col didn't stop at success for himself. With his brothers, he poured energy into building something more enduring. ATA, Australian Talent Associates, was their answer to the chaos of an unstructured industry. At a time when many artists were exploited or discarded, Col's vision was different. He wanted control, not just over his own destiny, but over the system itself. ATA managed artists, booked shows, produced recordings, and even handled publishing. It was revolutionary. As ATA expanded through the 1960s and 70s, the company brought on new talent, organized massive events, and took on international acts. The Joye family became synonymous with professionalism and polish. Col, though stepping back from the spotlight, remained deeply involved in scouting and mentoring artists. His name opened doors. His reputation protected those who worked with him. In private, he was known to be fiercely loyal, meticulous in contracts, and deeply passionate about preserving Australian talent. Meanwhile, Kevin Jacobsen, younger, bolder, and more aggressive, was emerging as the public face of the company. He organized major concert tours, bringing global acts to Australian stages. His dealings with artists like Roy Orbison and the Bee Gees gave ATA international clout. But as Kevin's ambition grew, so did the gap between the brothers' philosophies. Col remained cautious, grounded in the old-school values of artist integrity and careful planning. Kevin chased spectacle, bigger events, riskier deals, grander visions. While their talents had once complemented each other, they were now beginning to clash. The late 1980s saw a gradual but undeniable shift. Kevin began acquiring more control, gaining majority stakes in various ATA ventures. Col, who had always trusted his family implicitly, did not immediately recognize the implications. Legal structures shifted quietly. Documents were signed under the assumption of brotherly trust. But in the shadows, the company was morphing, and Col's name was starting to fade from its official documentation. Then, in the early 1990s, it happened. Without fanfare, without warning, Col Joye was removed from the very company he had founded. No press release, no tribute, just a series of legal maneuvers that left him holding nothing. The man who had built ATA from the ground up, who had created the careers of dozens of artists, was erased from its future. For the public, Col simply retired. But insiders knew better. He had been outplayed by his own brother. The betrayal devastated him. Friends later recalled how Col withdrew from the scene almost entirely. He rarely spoke of the events. He gave no interviews about it. There were no lawsuits, no public statements, no battles in the press. Just silence. For Col Joye, the stage had always been about joy, not conflict. And when the music stopped, he chose dignity over drama. But that choice came at a cost. The public never got the full story. Col Joye didn't make headlines with angry outbursts or courtroom fights. But behind that dignified silence was a heartbreak that few could truly grasp. A legacy gutted, a life's work lost, and a brother's betrayal that cut deeper than any business deal ever could. It began with a series of boardroom restructures that seemed procedural at the time. Kevin Jacobsen, by then already spearheading massive international tours for stars like Michael Jackson and Barbra Streisand, was consolidating power. Col, who had increasingly stepped back from day-to-day operations, remained a co-owner in name, but his grip on the company's actual mechanics was slipping. It wasn't until key decisions were made without his involvement that he realized something had changed. Something irreversible. According to industry whispers, Kevin had quietly maneuvered legal ownership away from Col over the course of several years. Whether through changes in shareholdings, amended contracts, or technicalities lost in the legal language, the end result was devastatingly clear. Col Joye no longer had any control over ATA, the empire he had spent more than 30 years building from the ground up. There was no explosive confrontation, no public feud, only a quiet, bitter end. Friends who were close to Col at the time described a man stunned, not just by the loss of business, but by the unraveling of a bond he had once considered unbreakable. He was crushed, one longtime associate said in an interview years later. Not angry, not spiteful, just heartbroken. That company was his life, and Kevin knew it. The media, for the most part, remained unaware. To them, Col Joye was simply a legend easing into retirement. The man who once electrified the nation with guitar riffs and television smiles had faded from the spotlight, respectfully, gently, as so many old stars do. But the truth was far darker. It wasn't time or age that pushed Col aside. It was family. In a rare, carefully worded interview in the late 1990s, Col hinted at the pain without naming names. Sometimes the biggest surprises don't come from strangers, he said. They come from the people you thought would always have your back. He never elaborated. He never accused. But for those who knew the story, the message was unmistakable. As ATA moved forward under Kevin's sole leadership, Col became a ghost in its history, unmentioned in company milestones, uncredited in retrospectives. Even as tributes rolled in from the Australian Recording Industry Association and fellow artists, the narrative subtly shifted. Kevin was now the mogul. Col became a footnote, the old rocker with the charming smile, remembered fondly, but left behind. But fans never forgot, nor did the artists he had mentored. Quietly, reverently, they spoke of Col's generosity, his eye for talent, his unwavering belief in Australian music. They knew who had laid the foundation. They knew whose name had built ATA's reputation, even if the company didn't say it anymore. Perhaps the cruelest irony is that Col Joye's name, once synonymous with Australian rock, became estranged from the very industry he helped shape. As anniversaries passed and music documentaries were produced, his absence was noticeable. Not scandalous, not suspicious, just missing. But behind the scenes, there were those who never let go of the truth. Musicians, producers, old colleagues, they carried the story in hushed tones, honoring the man whose dignity had cost him everything. Some called it the price of trust, others the cost of silence. But all agreed, Col Joye didn't deserve what happened. And yet, through it all, he never lashed out, never launched a counter-narrative, never attempted to reclaim the spotlight, perhaps because for Col, the music had always mattered more than the applause. And the betrayal, as deep as it ran, would never erase what he had already given to the culture, the country, and the generations who grew up singing his songs. Col Joye's story is a profound reflection of the fragile intersection between art, family, and business, a mix that often breeds both brilliance and heartbreak. From an objective perspective, it's impossible to deny the monumental impact he had on Australian music. As a pioneering artist, Col helped define a uniquely Australian sound at a time when local talent struggled for recognition. His role in founding ATA Records established infrastructure that empowered countless artists and shaped the industry for decades. His achievements are a testament to his vision, resilience, and passion. However, The darker chapters of his story remind us that even the brightest legacies can be shadowed by personal betrayal and corporate politics. The loss of ATA Records to his own brother is a stark example of how trust within family businesses can be vulnerable, especially when intertwined with ambition and power struggles. It underscores the harsh reality that success in the entertainment world doesn't just demand talent and hard work, but also sharp acumen and sometimes ruthless tactics. For many fans and industry insiders, the way Col Joye was edged out remains a painful chapter. It challenges the nostalgic image of a harmonious family empire and reveals a more complicated truth behind the scenes. Yet, despite the loss and silence that followed, Col's legacy is undiminished. His music, his early contributions to Australian rock and roll, and his role in elevating local artists continue to inspire. What makes this story so compelling for audiences is the blend of triumph and tragedy. A hero who built an empire, only to be betrayed from within. It raises important questions about loyalty, the cost of ambition, and the sacrifices behind the fame we often romanticize. Col Joye's experience is not unique in the entertainment industry, but it stands out because of its deeply personal nature and the emotional restraint he maintained throughout. Now we turn to you, our audience. What do you think of Col Joye's legacy? Does his story change how you view the rock and roll era in Australia? Have you heard of similar stories where family ties were tested by business? Share your thoughts, impressions, or even your favorite Col Joye moments. After all, these stories aren't just about the past. They're about understanding the human stories that shape the music we love. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Col Joye's journey is more than a chapter in Australia's musical history. It is a timeless tale of dreams built with passion and shattered by the complexities of trust and family. The melodies he created still echo through the decades, carrying with them the spirit of a young nation finding its voice. Yet behind those notes lies a quieter, poignant legacy, one of resilience, dignity, and the unspoken scars of a man who gave everything for the music he loved. As the lights dim on his story, we're left with a haunting question. How often do the brightest stars lose their way not to rivals or fate, but to those they hold closest? The music industry's glamour can blind us to the human cost behind the scenes. Col Joye's life reminds us that behind every legend is a personal story, sometimes beautiful, sometimes tragic, but always deeply human. His name might have been overshadowed in business halls, but in the hearts of many, Col Joye remains the enduring symbol of Australia's rock and roll dawn. A legacy not measured by company shares or legal battles, but by the songs that still stir our souls, the memories that still inspire, and the truth that finally has been uncovered. The music goes on, and so does the story.